Hello, creative people. Welcome to Creative Conversations. My name is Hollis Citron, and we are so happy that you have chosen to spend your time with us. I am owner and founder of I Am Creative and Express Yourself Publishing, and I am on a mission to expand the definition of creativity beyond a pencil and a paintbrush and to empower people, especially adults, to own their voices and talents that come in so many different forms. This space was created to talk to people with all different kinds of jobs, hobbies, and interests, and to have conversations about experiences and perspectives, all centered around three questions. How do you define creativity? How do you incorporate it into your life? And why do you think it's important? Then we have a free-flowing conversation and we see where it goes. So I have had the opportunity to speak to so many. I've spoken to musicians, comedians, doctor, lawyer, wrestlers, Reiki masters, and entrepreneurs as young as 13. And these conversations explore the reality that creativity is not cute, it is necessary. People have defined creativity as that magic spark, how we show up in our life, imagination, basically all that we are and want to be, do, or have. So I believe from my heart that sharing these stories gives one the ability to expand their thinking, open themselves up for more self-expression, to feel more empowered, connected, and dare I say, happy. So my inspiring guest for today is Eugene DeGeorge. Eugene, welcome to the space.
Hollis, thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate your spending some time on this sunny afternoon. Still a little chilly for the end of April, but I guess we'll take it as it comes.
Yes, well, so happy that you're here and can't wait to dive into this topic of creativity with you. So before we dive into the first question, I am going to ask you a would you rather question. And then we are going to learn more about who you are. So Eugene, would you rather eat ice cream or cake?
Oh, wow. Can I say both now?
Yes, this is a creative show. You can say anything you want.
Oh, ice cream or cake, I guess at this point in my life, I'd probably go with the ice cream.
Why do you say that? Why at this point in your life?
You get older, your metabolism changes, and all the sugar in the cake would kind of like throw me for a little bit of a loop. But the ice cream goes down, no pun intended, but maybe it goes down a lot smoother.
You could also have an ice cream cake.
Ooh, that's even better. Yeah, sure. There you go. So now we got to reframe the whole question.
There's the compromise.
Would you rather have ice cream cake or an ice cream cake?
So I got so excited here and talking to you with the idea of talking to you that I forgot to ask you. We're doing things a little bit backwards. Tell us a little bit more about who you are.
Yeah, sometimes, that's a good question. Does anybody know who they really are?
Yeah, we're getting philosophical. Yeah.
Yes, I come out. That's the way my wife always says, "You're like an onion." I've known her for 40 years, and we've been married for our anniversary is May 3rd, 36 years. And she says, "You're like an onion. Every time I peel a piece of you off, there's another piece right behind it." He's like, so after 40 years, she still hasn't figured me out. So I figured maybe that's good.
That's
so,
amazing.
Yeah.
It's
So when
not
you say
boring.
yeah, well, that's it. So when you ask the question, I'm being again a little philosophical and humorous at the same time. About, well, who are you? That's a good question. I keep trying to figure that one out myself. But I know what you're asking me. It's just give me some basic historical background. So let me take a deep breath, and if I can get through this. Okay. So first, to let the audience know, since they can't see me, I am a boomer. There you go for all you millennials and Zers and Xers out there. Born in 1953. What can I say? The typical growing up kind of thing. Went to college, Montclair State College in New Jersey. Now it's a university. Did major in English, but I also had and then after that, I went to try to get an MBA in business, but like everything else, I just got married at that time and had no money to pursue that, so that kind of ended. Fast forward, yeah, my first marriage ended in 1981 after 4 years, um, and then a few years later, I met Susan, who's my wife now, and that's how we had Sarah, our daughter. During all that time, I've always been a writer. I always liked writing. Even when I was in grammar school, I had this sort of, I wouldn't say I was drawn to it, but I just had this thing that I liked it, you know. And then eventually, as I got older, I said, oh, I really enjoy this. And when I was in college, let's say, um, I did some more, I tried to be a little more serious. I was an English major. I used to send short stories out to the New Yorker and the Atlantic. Again, I grew up in Northeast Jersey, right outside of New York City. So New York was not far away from me. I went to high school in Newark, but I grew up in a town called Belleville. And that, I guess, was always there, but nothing came of it. Again, flash forward, got into the workforce, worked here, there, and then eventually ended up working a family business. My family was in construction and property management, and I did that for 20 years, but I always had the feeling of writing, and I did get back to it sometime in the, let me see, about mid to late 80s. That's when I wrote a short novella, which is one of the first books I got published, self-published, really, Reaching the Plateau, which is about a group of workers. And the whole theme of that is the American dream. We here in America have this thing about, the American dream. I don't think any other country has that. You don't hear anybody talk about the Canadian dream or the Australian dream, but it's the American dream, which is, my family was that. My grandparents were not born in this country. They came over, and sort of like third generation. It was always, well, you got to reach a goal, do better, blah, blah, blah. And that's what it's all about, sort of like frustrations and whatever that people have working in a small company. And it's, but I always, and I also, nothing much came of that, two things happened, and now I'm going to get a little personal here. I hope I'm not going on too far.
We're going to answer this, and then we're going to dive into our first question and then learn more about you.
Okay, let me
So
just
go ahead. So finish that thought.
just wrap up. I'm trying to kind of speed it up a little bit as to how I got to from there to here.
Because we'll learn more after the next question.
Okay.
Yeah, but go ahead.
That's when I got into, so after that, I always had this writing. It was, some of it had been written down and everything, but some of it was just all in my head, and at one point, I just decided that, okay, I think it's time to maybe after the short book got published. So I said, well, let me try to put this other stuff together. And I started doing that. And that came about. I had enough for like one bigger book or two. And I said, let me break it up into two smaller books just for the hell of it. Because now I have three instead of, but after the first book came out, I realized the second book would just be, again, these are two books of poetry, would just be a rehash of the first. So the second book, which is the one that just came out, Waiting for the Train, I wanted to take it in a different direction. So I put some more newer stuff. So it kind of brings me up to date to where I'm at now in a way. Okay. And but the thing that really was I guess the one kicker was that this whole concept of digital publishing, which wasn't around. I mean, in the old days, you sent a book to a publisher, and if they liked it, fine. And at this day and age, unless you're really, really established, like a Jim Patterson or a Stephen King or somebody, or Janet Ivanovich or somebody, mystery writer, stuff like that, nobody wants to know you. So when digital publishing came about, I looked into it and I said, hey, well, let me check this out. This might be a route. And it turned out that it does work. The way of getting your stuff out into the marketplace, or at least out there, so that it's just not you sitting someplace in your room and you say, oh, this is really great. I have this manuscript here, but that's about as far as it goes,
Right. It's taking it to the next step. So it's really out there. So let's dive into the first question, and then we'll learn more about you.
Okay, fire away.
We'll hear more of your story. So, so Eugene, how do you define the word creativity?
Now there's another good question. We're getting philosophical again.
Thank you. Yes.
How do I don't know. How do you define creativity? I'm going to answer that with, yeah, okay, I'll do it. There's two ways of, you've heard of deductive reasoning, right? Which is something that's like what Sherlock Holmes did or what Columbo did. You take all of that, you take the big and it comes to the small, and then you find out who the murderer was, and if it was the butler or whatever. Take all of the, now inductive reasoning is the opposite. You take this and you go out to the bigger sphere of things. It's a little different concept because most people don't, everybody knows what deductive reasoning is. What's creativity to me is you take something that's personal and you take that and you add something that brings it out to a bigger, what's the word? Not a bigger audience, but a bigger vision. So you take this concept of whatever it might be, and you try to put it into a framework of something that's bigger than just an ordinary individual experience, if that's possible. I don't know if that's clarifying what creativity is, but to me that's sort of what it is.
That's the whole point of this conversation. The whole point of this conversation that I've spoken to over 200 people asking these same three questions that we're talking about, that we're going to be talking about, is to hear people's different perspectives and stories, because we all come with our own experiences. We all come with our own visions and versions of the truth, or whatever you want to call it. So it's so interesting. I love you mentioning deductive and inductive reasoning and putting it out there in a bigger sphere. Beautiful.
Yeah. And most people, you say, what's inductive? You say, oh, what's deductive reasoning? Oh, yeah, I know. But what's inductive? And that's the opposite. And that's what a lot of, whether it's a writer or a painter or a singer, anybody, you take something, but you add something to it that makes it bigger than what it is. What's that all saying about the sum is bigger than the total, the sum of its parts, or something like that? It's like all the parts are actually, that's the opposite. It's like all the parts is what makes the total,
Yeah.
Like putting go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
So it's like a puzzle, it's like, you have to put all the pieces together before you get the whole picture there, and so you can wood one piece, but that's not going to do you much good. And I guess most of, I'm going to throw in sort of a metaphor here, but most people, and this is not a criticism, it's just the way, the nature of life and of existence is that we get into that whole framework, again, going back to even myself, get to work and all of a sudden you forget about all this stuff. And then suddenly your life is just this 1, 2, or 3 pieces of your life. And the creativity isn't there, so that you had those 3, but that's it. But you're not looking at the whole thing anymore. All the other pieces, have kind of gotten lost in your lifetime, which is, unfortunate.
What you just said, I think, is so important, which is why I do what I do. Is you just said, from what I heard, that within this whole idea, this puzzle, you said there are all these pieces to the puzzle, basically in order to create the vision. But so often people get stuck on 1 to 3 pieces, as opposed to all of the pieces to put together this bigger vision, to put together this whole. And then people often, from what I see on my end, is people get frustrated, people get depressed, they get angry, all of these bad feelings, because all of these pieces are missing in their life that aren't really put together into this bigger vision of what they want. Because for so many reasons, there could be like, well, I'm not worthy of that. I really don't know what I want because I haven't taken the time for myself to actually try different things and mess up and not be perfect at everything, but just enjoying the experience. There's so many reasons why people have 1, 2, or 3 pieces when there's really 100-piece puzzle.
I think it's like I said, it's just the nature of life, it's been written about so many times over and over, but it's, you get sucked into that, you go to college, you come out of college, you go to school, the next thing, oh, you got to get a job, you get a job, you have a boyfriend, a girlfriend, up, you get married, and it's like that whole thing. And it's like, what you don't realize is each time you take another step, you think you're moving towards something, and maybe you are, maybe you aren't, but Now, this is, now some people that's perfectly fine. That's what they want. Some people just want to have that. They want to get a good job, have a family, blah, blah, blah. And that's fine. That's absolutely, I'm not knocking that at all, because I know a lot of people in the creative kind of, they always kind of like make light, oh, if that's what you want. But if you're a creative person, and that's the problem, if you're a creative person, it gets frustrating, because it's like, well, what do I do? You know, how do I myself, what I'm talking to you about, it may never have happened, but sometimes, now I'm going to expound on that a little bit, is like, you always got to, and this is what I tell people. I say, well, what, do you have any advice? Well, the thing is, do what you have to do, but always keep the dream alive inside of you, because the minute you get rid of the dream, the minute you finally write it off, oh, that's it, it's never, I'm not going to bother, well, then the dream is dead. But if you keep it alive, you never know what's going to be coming around the corner. Like I said, with me, I just figured, oh, this is never going to happen, and it never would have if I didn't. And you have to always be, perceptive and see what's happening. And when it came to this whole thing about digital pub, I never heard about it before. But then I was smart enough to say, let me look into that, And that's what really was one of the catalysts that got things going. And then I says, okay, maybe this is a way to do what I wanted to do. Now, granted, my books are self-published, but they get out there. I'm on Amazon, I'm on Kindle. So it's like, all right, I'm not being published by Macmillan or, Viking Press or something, but it's out there. And who knows? As I tell people, 50 years from now, maybe somebody will be looking at my stuff and saying, hey, wow, this wasn't too bad. I wonder who this guy was. Then again, maybe not, but one never knows.
But it's a matter of talking about it. You have to talk about it, and you have to tell people about it, like we're doing right now, which is what
exactly
all of these spaces are.
You took the words out of my mouth.
For people to know about it. Like, yes, this is the first step. This is the beauty of the age that we're in now, that you can work with an indie publishing house. You can publish yourself. You can, but you're taking the step to get it out there.
And there's nothing negative about it. In the old days, doing that would be sort of a negative, with the exception of poetry. Nobody publishes that anymore. So everybody figures you're going to have to self-publish. You don't, but anything else, this is the new way of doing it. And it's not an ego. It's like some people, how do I put it? Think that, oh, well, you're on some sort of an ego trip. Oh, wow. Oh, I had this podcast with Hollis. And, I said, no, I said, that's the way it's done. You have to put yourself out there, or else then you're not doing anything further. You're taking the next step, which is, okay, I wrote it. Now I've gotten it self-published, but now what do? I got lucky because I have a daughter who has her own public relations business, and she's the one that basically set this whole thing up for me, as well as another couple of other interviews. So in that respect, I could say, there's also, as with anything in life, there's also a little bit of luck that's involved too. And,
there is, but at the same time, it's so much of mindset work that, like you mentioned,
luck sometimes,
like you mentioned, like people be like, oh, you're talking about yourself too much. Well, I wrote a freaking book. Like, I wrote a book not just to sit there and for nobody to see it. I wrote it because it's sharing, and it's not coming from an ego. It's coming from a place of inspiring. It's coming from a place, like you said, of inductive reasoning, of taking it to a bigger vision. You have this vision and you were taking it into a bigger space. So I want to kind of backtrack a little bit. So here you went to school, you were an English major, you ended up in the family business, construction, still didn't stop your writing. You were doing stuff with the business, but you were still writing. And then tell us about, then some health issues happened.
I was going to say, when I was talking before about two things happened. The one thing was, of course, like I said, the digital publishing. The second thing was, in fact, it was just on April 23rd. I always mark that as my day of embarkation. But on April 23rd, 1999, I was only 44, maybe 45, 46. Anyway, I was diagnosed with prostate cancer, which unfortunately these days people think, oh, it's no big deal. I was diagnosed with an aggressive form of cancer. I was treated with radiation for 2 whole months, and was told that they couldn't guarantee me anything because it wasn't aggressive cancer. They said, well, 3 to 5 years from now, we don't know where we're going to be. And now 23 years later, I'm still kicking. I've gone from stage 1 to stage 4, which means it's metastasized to distant parts in my body. I do get treatments every 4 months. In fact, I have another one coming up next week. But thankfully, it's still being held in check. And that was the second thing, because I started, well, all right, Gene, two things. I says, if you don't do it now, then it may never get done. And the second thing, in fact, I remember a little story going back to about keeping the dream alive. I always thought, well, this is what you want to do. And then when that happened, I said, well, okay, what are you going to do now? You can either, say, well, it's never going to happen, or do it. But if you say it's not going to happen, and this is where you have to, I guess it's a personal thing, you say, but then don't look back and say, oh, I could have done this, but this happened, that happened, I was married, I got divorced, and that screwed me up, or I did this and that happened, and I got the cancer and that happened. It says you have an opportunity right here, right now, to do something. If you don't do it, look in the mirror. It's all on you. Nobody else. You can't blame anybody, any situation, or nothing. It's all you. And then you make that decision. And that's when I said, no, I'm going forward, because I couldn't, after all of this time. I said, you spent the whole lifetime with it. You're just going to just trash the whole thing. I says, you have an opportunity now. And that's when I made the move. And that's why we're talking today.
Which is so freaking inspiring, I have to say. So first of all, congratulations. I don't know if it's congratulations, but April 23rd, 23 years later, like, you're a rock star. And obviously these stories are meant to come out, and you didn't become a victim. You decided to move forward and take the reins and be like, okay, so tell us a little bit more. So here you are working in the family business.
Yeah.
This diagnosis happened. Did you start to write more while you were still working in the family business, or was there a break in that?
Yeah, it's sort of like an up and down kind of thing. I was writing in college, then I got married, then I kind of lost track there for a while. Like I said, then 4 years later, that marriage broke up, and I guess I started writing a little bit again because I had a lot of time on my hands. And then I got back, and then I had to get back on track about, well, then I met, Sue, my current wife, and you get once again back on the track of, well, what are you going to do now? Okay, get married again. We have a kid now. That becomes your primary focus. And, but I did keep, like I said, I kept writing, never knowing, well, if it, at that point, I guess maybe my mindset was, well, let me just write it down. At least I'll have it here and, for myself. But I guess it was just that, I don't know, maybe there was also a sense that maybe something was going to happen later on in my, I don't know, but I just kept doing it. I just figured, well, there's no sense just keeping it inside. Let me get it out and on paper and see where it takes me. And it was always there. And then things died off again. That's when I had the cancer diagnosis, but I had it all there. And then, like I said, when it brought up again, came up again, I said, what am I, the cancer part, then when the digital publishing came along, I said, what about that? And that's when I realized, well, this is that moment in time that, sometimes we all wait for, and sometimes we miss it because we aren't, I said, wow, okay, I have the tools here and I have something here, but I still have to put it all together. It wasn't like, oh, everything was sitting here waiting for that to happen. I had to jump in there with both feet and say, okay, now let's take it to the next level as far as that was concerned. I don't know if that explains the question, but, or answers the question, as the case may be. Oh, hold on, Hollis.
Oh, that was me. I apologize. I was coughing before. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me? I unmuted myself.
Yeah, okay, we're back on.
Okay. Yeah, sorry about that. That was my fault. I coughed and I muted myself.
Okay.
So there's two things that I really appreciate what you just said, which is, hold on, let me just make a mark. Edit. I don't know how far in we are, but okay, about 37 minutes. I love that you said, no sense keeping it inside. So you were like, I'm just going to write, because as we know, life happens. And when life happens, they're real stuff. They're real stuff like divorce, and then figuring out your emotions and kind of where you are, which is actually a whole bunch to write about. But we often get so stuck in ourselves that it kind of paralyzes us. And then you got your diagnosis, which is a whole other realm of things. And then new love, and then a child. Like, life is life. So there could be a million excuses for reasons of not to do something. But then here you said something to the effect of, we wait for these things to happen, but then sometimes we miss it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think there's so much poetry in that, because it's somebody saying like, well, why doesn't this happen for me? Why doesn't it happen for me that I can get published? I don't understand. But then there could be this glimpse of an opportunity that pops up, but you're so caught in the fact of, why isn't this happening, that we miss it.
Exactly. And sometimes we do it to ourselves. We'll just say, I'm not that good at this, what I do isn't really good. And then but you never know. I always say maybe that's where a little bit of, I don't know if it's ego, but it's not ego. It's just belief in yourself, to say, hey, my life has worth and meaning. And I'm just not going to let this I guess, I don't want to get too personal here, because it's like,
Okay, share what you want to share.
I've always been an
this is
individual.
a safe space.
Yeah, I've always been a very from when I was younger. You see, my mother was not a well woman. She was diagnosed with some illnesses, and in those days, she was in for shock treatments. We're talking late 50s, early 60s now. And she was gone for an entire summer. And even though I had an older brother and a younger sister, I was sort of like the typical middle child. My old brother was older. He was off doing his thing. My younger sister was being taken care of. So I was sort of left to my own devices. So here I am, this little kid, having to make his own lunch and do this and all that. So all my life, I've sort of always had to rely on myself. So as I go later on in life, again, after my first marriage was ended, the same thing. It was like I was always relying on myself. So as a result of that, I think that's where this kind of like, you have to have, you have to have belief. And the reason I say that is because when that happened, when my first marriage ended, which was many, many years ago, this is ancient history, but I remember at one point, again, these are things in your life. I could have been overwhelmed by it. And, naturally, of course, all of a sudden you say, oh my God, what happened? This is going to be, till death do you part and all that. And all of a sudden, 4 years later, kaboom, my wife found somebody else, whatever. I didn't get into that. But the point was, I'm not going to let this get me down. I says, why should I destroy myself? I said, I could go out and become a drunk and an alcoholic or a drug addict or do whatever. I says, if somebody doesn't want me, well, to hell with them. That's their choice. But I have worked as a human being, as an individual, and I always have been. And I just relied on that. And so that's what sort of always sustained me through all these low periods. And again, it comes back to the writing. So when the opportunity came, I was sort of maybe ready for it, because my whole life beforehand had always been to rely on yourself. Don't blame anyone or any other situation. It goes back to what I was saying about, it's up to you. It's on your plate and you do it. And it doesn't always work out. I mean, there are other things that I did besides the writing that I won, and they were failures. But, and that's another thing, just keep on plugging along, because as I always say, you never know what's going to be around the next corner. Where you're at right now might be you may think it's a dead end, and then you go around the corner and all of a sudden something, and you have to be perceptive enough to know that, but if you're going to just kind of collapse into yourself, you'll then that's sort of, again, it goes back to the always keeping the dream alive. Once that happens, then the dream dies, and dare I say it, then you die too, not physically, but internally, you just die.
I love it's so, yeah, that's beautiful. It's beautiful. Thank you for bringing that up, because it's so important, and people need to hear it over and over again. And people may think, oh, I've heard that a million times, but you know what? There's a time when it clicks, because it resonates, because it's like, oh my gosh. Yeah. Because when your dream dies, and whatever that dream is, whether it's a dream of having a dog to a dream of having multi-million-dollar business, whatever it is, once you lose sight of it and kind of forget about it, and like you said, you don't give the worthiness and all that stuff gets in the way and kind of erases it, then you're just not a happy person.
No. And you always have to, like, I think you're almost psychoanalyzing me now, or maybe I'm doing it to myself. But I've always been a forward thinking person. So I'm not one that lives in the past, because the past is gone. In fact, in some of my poems, I always talk about past, present, and future. And I think one of the poems said, like, the past is history. And then it said the present is agony, but the future is fantasy. But it's sort of like you have to live in all three. And I guess to me, I was always a forward-looking person. I was always thinking about what the future would bring. Not that I'm, oh, pie in the sky, but just that,
Yeah.
Sometimes if you're in a bad situation, that may be it. So, the whole, I used to joke about people that said, live in the moment. I go, well, suppose the moment is excruciating. You don't want to be there. You want to take that moment and move forward with it, and I've always been like that. So life is like that. I mean, I hate to use a stupid metaphor, but it's like whether it's a TV or like a DVD player or anything, there's no pause in life. There's no rewind. And there's no fast forward. Well, there could be, but there's only, you just keep moving forward. So that's the nature of life. So whether you like it or not, you're going to move. Life is going to move you forward. And whether you go with it and run with it or whatever, that's up to you, but it's not going to wait for you. And you got to just be ready for everything. I'm getting really philosophical today all of a sudden.
This is wonderful. I love it.
This is what happens on a Friday afternoon.
It is, and we're talking creativity. So I want to touch on, I'm going to ask you the question, and then I'm going to ask you a specific question. So the next question is, how do you incorporate more creativity into your own life? But I would like you to start with you playing music.
Oh, yeah, okay. That was another thing that was also, I come at it, the folk revival of the 60s. Again, I grew up right out of New York City. I used to go, when I was in high school, I used to go over to Greenwich Village to the folk clubs and, listen to folk singers. At that point, really big stars like Bob Dylan, Simon and Garfunkel, they had already passed, but I saw a number of other people that played, and I was inspired that I started playing guitar when I was in 8th grade. Not very well, unfortunately, again, because my family is in the family business, they were struggling to get the business going, so I couldn't take lessons, and I've been totally, again, relied on myself, totally self-taught. I just watch what other people do and try to imitate it. And again, but I always kept that dream alive. And then, going back again, I think it was just before I was diagnosed with cancer. I said, I should get back into that. And I went out and got myself a guitar, and but I always held on to it. And I was always there, always there, always there. And again, just like with the digital publishing, I had a friend who's a good friend of my best friend, and my age, he's even older than me. We both ran businesses. And then once we got out of that, he went to New York. He started doing stand-up comedy. Wow. And then he actually got his SAG card, and he's actually been in a couple of movies. He's been directed by guys like Robert De Niro, and he's not a star. I mean, no, he doesn't even get a credit, but he did that. And then one time I went into it, and he was talking about, he was doing a stand-up comedy routine, and he says, I'm going to be doing an open mic. I go, what the hell is an open mic? He goes, you just go up there and you do whatever you want. I go, never heard about that before. He says, yeah, you could do that. And I said, oh, can you do that with singing? Oh, yeah. And a couple of times I went to a few places where we had open mics, and I'm saying, well, I can do that. These guys, they're better than I am because I haven't played in a while, but I think I can do that. And I got back into it, and moved down to Cape May, and I was down here. And all of a sudden I was in a music store getting my guitar restrung, and there was this thing for, if you ever come down here, go to the Cold Spring Brewery, and they have an open mic on Friday nights. In fact, normally tonight I would be doing it, but I'm doing this instead. And I said, let me go down there. And 3 years ago, I went, I had 3 songs to, all right, let me play me these 3 songs. And I did it. And it was like, wow, I never thought, you get up there, you're not on a stage, you're in a bar, but you're up there on a stage and doing it. And 3 years later, I mean, now I have a big portfolio of songs, but I just still go there, play. You get your open mic, your 15, 20-minute set. So you do maybe 4 or 5 songs, but it's fun, and you get to meet some other people who are playing. And that's what started. And then about 6 or 7 months ago, there was it was an actual theater in a way. This woman opened up called the End of the Road Theater in North Cape May. And it's actually a regular theater where you have seats to sit in and you go up on a stage. And just last night every end of the month, she has a local talent night. And you get up there and here I am doing my thing again. And it's like, wow, I never thought that I would be able to do this. But again, I hadn't kept that alive. I just said, that's it. And it's never going to happen. Boom, forget about it. But it was always inside that was there. And when I saw an opportunity, I said, okay, this is where I have to make my move. So between that and the writing, it's like, I'm sort of in a good spot now, from that. So, in effect, I'm saying it took me I'm 68 and a half, but a few years ago when I started, I said, it took me all of this time to get here, and thank God I was able to live this long to do it. But again, goes back to what I was saying. Just hang and keep the dream alive. You never know. You never know.
You never know.
Go ahead.
You don't have to know the how. It's like you don't know the how. You just knew that this was something that you enjoyed, and then it kind of presented itself at different parts along the way. And I guess, tell me how it feels. I want to hear more ways that you incorporate creativity into your life, but I do want to hear from you. What does it feel like when you're up on the stage? Can you describe that feeling?
It's funny. We're getting off books and into playing on stage, and I go in and so many people tell me, I could never do that. My God, how can you go up there and be on stage in front of all of these people? And I tell them, I said, the safest spot is up there on the stage. And people say, what do you mean? I said, because you're safe up there. That's your space. You're up there. You're not here with everybody else. Once you get up there, before I go on, I'm as nervous as anything. I'm But the minute I get up there and I'm standing, I'm getting the mic, and just in the mic, maybe I'll say a few words to the audience. And after like halfway through the first song, it just kind of like it all condenses, and I'm just up there and I'm having a good time. And it's like you're just into your own little world, and don't worry about those people out there. Half the people don't know what you're doing, and they think, wow, they're just listening. And if you miss a chord change or something, they don't really know. The only people that might know are the other players that are there, and they have the same problem. Like last night, I was up at the stage, and this one guy started a song. Halfway through it, he forgot the words. He just stopped. He goes, "This is one of my favorite songs. I forgot it." And you think, "Oh my God, that must be." Yeah, but it's like, you just kind of like let it roll. It's like, yeah, well, that happens, and if you let stuff like that bother you, then you don't get that. You have to, I guess, that's an old saying that they say now, stepping out of your comfort zone. But if you want to achieve something, sometimes that's what you have to do, whether it's on stage or whether getting the books published. I've had people say that to me. Oh, how could you write this personal stuff? And then anybody can, because that's what I wanted to do. I felt like, another level of, like, going back to the whole onion thing, another level is, I just wanted to say, hey, when I leave this world, I'm leaving something of myself behind me. Okay, I have a child, but like most people, I have a kid, that's, but I'm leaving something creative that somebody else might make benefit of. That's why I do it. I not only do it for myself, but it's also, hey, people will read this stuff and say, hey, I guess I'm not the only one that feels that way. Or, hey, I've thought this way before. Oh, wow, this guy feels the same way. Wow. So that means that we're all connected. I mean, it's like, one of my biggest themes is about when I write poetry and some of this, the connection between an individual and the world we live in. And this is, again, a theme that everybody has talked about. We do so many things to wall ourselves off from everybody. And then we wonder why we're, on our own. And it's like, that's why I try to, a lot of people say my poems are kind of dark, and in a way they are, but it's also a way that's part of life. It's part of the human condition. And anybody can do cheery stuff. But when you kind of get really into the nitty gritty, And it's like I say stuff that people will say, "Well, I felt that way, but I can never express it, or I can never say that because
Mm.
I'm afraid to say it, or I'm too embarrassed to say it." So I say it for them. You know.
You're making me think of, there's a word that I want to say first before I forget, which is perfectionism.
Mm,
When you were talking about getting up and playing and the person forgot the words,
yeah.
people get so caught in things having to be perfect and whatever that looks like in people's
Especially in
world
this,
that
yes,
they
especially in
stop.
our, yeah, in this society, the way we're at, I've seen it because, again, coming from the '60s, we sort of got away from that.
Yeah,
The whole idea of not perfection, because everybody had to be the tie and a hair comb perfectly in a suit, and
yeah.
we got away from that. And now what I see is it's all coming back again. I look on
Mm,
the TV every day, and you'll know what I'm saying. All these commercials, and it's like, oh, well, this grooming product and this hair product and shave this and do that and perfect grooming, and hey, and it's men too now. I mean, the old days it was mostly geared towards women. Now it's men too.
yeah.
Everybody's got to have the perfect body, have the six-pack abs, go out to the gym, have the perfect. You're going to drive everybody in this world, in this country, nuts, or in the Western
It's
society, because it's like
exhausting.
everybody's trying to have this and no,
Yeah,
you can't live up to that because nobody is.
yeah,
And
yeah, yeah,
everybody's afraid to admit that, oh, I'm not perfect. And then that's where you get that spiral into you. It's like, I got to be perfect. But being perfect means limiting yourself to this little narrow
yeah,
frame of reference.
yeah,
And then that's where, again, you miss out on things. You say, okay, I did that. And then you look back and you're like, well, great. I had the perfect body, or I had the perfect this. But beyond that, what else?
and I can't think of the famous person's name before she really became famous. She was a drug addict. Divorced, all this kind of stuff. That's just
Writer,
what wasn't
singer.
pretty. She's a writer and she's a motivational speaker.
Now,
Her,
she's still
her name,
alive.
her name, yeah, yeah, yeah. Her name will download to me, but I bring it up because she she writes and talks about these things that are
Mhm,
uncomfortable, that
mhm,
people don't like to talk about
mhm,
because it's embarrassing to say. So the way that she presents is she said that it all started when this Facebook quiz came around and you answer 25 questions. And she just kind of answered them and then sent them off. And then she
mhm.
walked away. And then she had 7 calls on her phone from her sister, which usually means she screwed up in some way. So she's like, oh my God, what did I do? What happened? And her sister's like, what kind of answers did you give on Facebook to
Yeah.
this thing? And she answered things like, being in rehab and just, wanting a hit, but she knew she wasn't going to take it. Just all of these things. So she was just like, oh my God, I screwed up. Like I shouldn't have
Yeah.
done that. But then she started getting all these direct messages of people saying, me too, me too, because she was the one that was brave enough to say it, as uncomfortable and as messy and as ugly as it is and imperfect as it is. She was perfectly, it just kind of came out. But then all these people hide beneath their layers and then they felt safe.
Yeah. Mm, mm, mm.
So that's what
That's
you're doing. So can you read to us actually a little bit? Do you have your book where you could just open up a page and give us a little sample of your writing?
okay. Well, I had 2 books of poetry. Let me see. I wanted to, because people like to say that, oh, your poetry is, uh,
Glennon Doyle. Sorry, that's her name. Glennon Doyle. It just downloaded.
I'm trying just trying to see something that might be something that's a little longer. Here's one of those, I call this 360 degrees. This is sort of leads us to what we were talking about.
Okay.
Maybe again, I deal a lot with alienation, isolation, and like I said, but it's just,
Okay.
and again, anyway, 360 degrees. I remember feeling dead and alone as the winter drained away all life, but soon the warmth of spring arrived and life began to revive. I remember the feel of spring, warm and new and alive. Then followed the heat of summer, and life continued to thrive. Summer continued to spread its spell, and so life all around. But the spell of life was soon broken and scattered along the ground. That's like leaves. Then came the frost of fall, cold and hard and dead, as winter returned quickly and sealed life's fate again. So here I stand once again amid the marble gray, and I feel the same way I felt a year ago today. Now you say, well, okay, on one level, it's about a person who's obviously not really moving, but at the same time, it's sort of a human and nature kind of thing. You notice nature is changing constantly, but this person is still the same way. You know, which is again, the seasons are changing all around him. Life is happening. This person says, I'm still the same way I was a year ago. Everything else has changed, but I'm still the same.
Wow. Thank you for reading that, which it's not really possible for us to be the same because we are evolving. I think it goes back to me to what you said earlier is that we miss it.
Well, it's like some of us are evolving and some of us don't. One of my favorite poets, because I grew up with him, Bob Dylan. Of course, everybody knows who Bob Dylan is. And he always, one of his lines in one of his songs is like, he not busy born is busy dying. You know, sort of almost the same way. That's exactly what it is. You know, either you move ahead, you continue, or then you're just going to slowly wither away. And you know.
Wow.
I had another one here.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hold on. Let me see here. A lot of it is like
everybody, we're getting our own poetry reading here.
I'm sorry.
You're good.
Oh, I know that. I know the one I want to read, and now I can't find it. Isn't that the way it happens? I don't want to take too much time. If I can't find her, then I won't.
Okay, so you'll find it. So
here it is. Statue.
Okay, good. Okay.
This is another thing. This is called statue. And I'll read it and then I'll explain it. It says, when I speak, you do not hear me. When I question, you do not answer. Your silence echoes through me. I stand waiting for a reply. And it's like, again, we look for answers. So the person's in a museum looking at a statue. We go into these places and think, well, maybe we're going to get an answer to life or something like that. And this person's looking for an answer, but there's none forthcoming. So I just thought that was an interesting. Okay, you know, that when we go in there, it's like, oh, you just don't. Let's face it, we go into a museum or something. We're always looking for something to explain things, you know, and then we're never going to get that explanation. But I just thought that was, you know.
But I have to say, when you do, there's two ways that I heard that. One is that as if you're talking to a person and maybe it's with a spouse or a partner and you're frustrated because they're not giving you, they're almost like a statue. They're not giving you back what you're asking.
You are good, Hollis, because that's exactly how it originally started.
I mean,
you are good. That's exactly how it was. I was thinking about, I hate to say it, going back.
Yeah.
I was thinking about my ex and say that's exactly how it was, talking to another person. But then I figured, I didn't want to get into that. Then I thought about it more. I said, maybe that person is like a statue or talking to a statue, and in fact, a statue. And again, you take it.
Because they're
frozen.
Are very
perceptive. Well, you get an A. You get an A for this course.
Thank you. It's the looking on these deeper levels, but there's that aspect of it. But then there's also when I go to an art museum or just go out and I find that I'm looking out, the answers are inside, even if I'm waiting to get it from somebody else. And I love my husband dearly, and he most probably won't listen to this just because, but when I get frustrated with him because he's not giving me something back that I'm waiting for, it's really within me. It's kind of like, Hollis, what are you getting so annoyed about? First of all, the answers are really within you. And if you really want something from him or anybody else, then you just have to straight up ask him very clearly and precisely and tell him what you need. And then if you're not getting it, then express what you need. But the most satisfaction I've gotten really is an understanding that looking out for these answers, it really is inside. It's just opening myself up or opening oneself up, but I'll speak for myself, opening myself up to listen instead of getting all this stupid other chatter in the way. You know?
Well, I'm not going to argue with that point.
So thank you so much for sharing on that. That was really great. So is there any other ways that you want to express where in ways in life that you incorporate more creativity into your own life? Do you have any kind of a morning routine that you do for yourself?
No, I sometimes this is where maybe I kind of go off the beaten path with people who write, because I've talked to some writers and it's, oh, you have to write every day, or or else you're not a writer. And I say, well, if you're working on a book, and you might have to do that, but sometimes you can't force, again, going back to creativity, you can't force creativity. You can't just sit down and say, okay, well, I'm going to write, like they sometimes, oh, write 1,500 words a day. Doesn't matter. No, to me, if you write 1,500 words, you're writing 1,500 words. It may mean nothing. A writer friend of mine who was working on poetry, they came up with this idea of writing something every day, a poem every day. And I said, well, that's good, except that then you're just forcing yourself to write about something that may or may not mean anything. You just want to put it so that it's like, now you're becoming more mathematical about it. It's like, all right, I'm going to do this because I have to do it. But is there any creativity there? Rather, now, granted, the opposite side is you just can't sit around and wait for creativity to bonk you on the head. You do have to have a certain set, but sometimes it'll happen if you kind of like keep stirring the pot. But to just say every day I'm going to do this, to me, I could never sort of fall into that thing. Sometimes you have days when it's like, we've all heard of this, of writer's block. Well, if you have writer's block, then you're not going to be writing anything because you have nothing to write about. And that's what happens. Sometimes you just have to keep stirring the pot and something will come up, and then you take it from there. But to just mechanically say I'm going to do something every day, that's not it. So I don't work like that. And the beauty about poetry, especially is the fact that you can keep a poem in your brain and work it around and keep having it go round and around in your brain and in your mind, and without necessarily even having to write it down. I mean, sometimes go out for a walk or stuff like that, and all of a sudden a thought will come into my head, and just sort of like start running it around. Or if I'm out, shouldn't say it if I'm not, that I'm driving, but if I'm out and my wife is driving, something happened, and all of a sudden I could just sit there and I could start running things through. I don't have to write it down. It's in my mind. Going back to what I said, a lot of what I wrote down for these other books were things I had written many years ago, but I had to just kind of squeeze it out and say, okay, do you remember that? Yeah, I remember. I started writing it like this, and maybe I've changed it a bit because now that was written back then, and now that, but yeah, I'm still had to remember a lot of the stuff that I'd written down at one time. It was a interesting way of approaching it, but routine. No, I'm one of those people. I don't believe that, like I said, I've had people, oh, I don't sit down and write every day. I don't think that's an absolute necessity. You have to keep the thing going, but you can't force creativity, but neither can you wait until it hits you. There's that little,
like you said, stirring the pot.
Yeah,
stirring
that's
the
what
pot.
creates tension. What you need is that tension between, this half and that half, that will get you to that creative spot. If you go to one side or the other, then you kind of lose it.
Yeah, and I really think it's important, something that you mentioned too, where you said, well, if you don't do this, you're not a writer.
Yeah.
Well, BS. Like, come on, really? I mean, not everybody has the same way of doing things. And this is what makes me nuts, is where we get into these labels. It's, well, you're a writer if you do things this way. You're a business person if you do things this way. We put ourselves in these small little boxes, and anybody who's out of the box, then you kind of say, well, you don't fit into that. But no. You're breaking out of the box. And I appreciate what you just said about needing tension between each half.
That's where the creative impulse comes from. It's like, what we used to call the head and the heart, or the real and the ideal. You have these two poles. If you go too far one side, you become too mechanical, like I was talking, or too far to the other side, and you just wait for it. You've got to bring those two tensions. Like that's how electricity is created. You got the plus, you got the minus.
Yeah.
You don't have electricity with either or. You have to bring them both together to get to that third point, as they used to say,
Yeah.
to get, and that's what you need. And it's, if there's anything, it's keeping that tension alive, which is the hard part, because it's easy to fall into one side or another. And so if there's anything, I mean, that's one thing to think about, keeping that, because a lot of, going back to when I was taking poetry classes, like a lot of the not romantic writers, but like people like Wordsworth, Coleridge, that's what they were really talking about, was trying to get to a higher state of consciousness. And you need that. Remember, I had one poetry teacher, that's what he all talked about, the real, the ideal, and the third point that you have to get to.
Yeah.
Go either a side